it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Tory party conference drew to a dramatic end, and it all comes down to the question, has Rishi Sunak turned it round? First, it was the bold calls on net zero, then it was the freezing of civil service jobs, and now it's the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. If that won't convince the great Nigel Farage to join the party, then what will? The scrapping of HS2's northern leg is a triumph for those of us who have consistently called for sensible spending and cutting waste. The PM has promised the £36 billion saved will be used for multiple transport projects in a complete overhaul of northern and regional infrastructure, which surely helps pave the way for unleashing Britain's latent economic potential. I'm a fan of nannies, as many of you will know, but not of the nanny state. And I don't see how the proposed new measures that have increased the legal smoking age by 1 year every year would work in practice. In 50 years' time, could we be seeing 64-year-olds being asked for identification in corner shops to buy cigarettes? Plus, in a time of record waiting lists, striking staff demanding exorbitant pay rises, along with relentless crises and scandals, is there anything less you'd expect from the NHS than flirting with the idea of reparations? Well, that's exactly what it's been doing about slavery in Scotland. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by a trenchant panel this evening, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the contributing editor to Socialist Novara Media, Michael Walker. As always, as you know, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the News of the Day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Well, good evening. The top story tonight, the Prime Minister has confirmed today that the northern leg of HS2 is being cancelled. Speaking after weeks of speculation, Rishi Sunak told the Conservative Party conference in Manchester today he's ready to talk tough. Well, he's defended the move, saying the money will be better spent developing projects in the North and the Midlands. HS2 will still run from London Euston, but current management, he said, will no longer be responsible.
We'll reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation.
Well, in reaction to that, the former Prime Minister David Cameron has criticised the announcement, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity has been lost. And the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, said the new investment plan didn't create a coherent transport network. But the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, said he's disappointed with the decision but believes it is a good compromise. Well, in his speech, the Prime Minister also reaffirmed his commitment to stop small boats crossing the English Channel.
Our new law will ensure that if you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Now, I am confident that once flights start going regularly to Rwanda, the boats will stop coming. Just look at how our returns agreement with Albania has seen the numbers coming from there fall by 90%. I am confident that our approach complies with our international obligations. But know this, I will do whatever is necessary to stop the boats.
Well, in news away from conference, the Sunderland man who died after being attacked by an XL bully has been named by Northumbria Police as Ian Langley. Police attended the incident last night following reports a dog had injured the 54-year-old who was taken to hospital with life-threatening injuries. A 44-year-old man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder and an investigation has been launched. The dog was destroyed at the scene. A second dog was seized. And lastly, a sixth person has been arrested in connection with the Crooked House pub fire in Staffordshire. A 23-year-old from Leicestershire was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit arson with intent. He's been released on conditional bail while the investigation continues. 4 men and a woman were previously arrested in connection with the fire that destroyed the iconic pub in August. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
When you were doing Bible studies at school, scripture or divinity, whatever you called it, you will remember the story of Elijah. Elijah, the prophet of God, and there was a drought over the land. And he prayed that the drought should end. And suddenly he saw in the distance a cloud no bigger than a man's hand. And the cloud got bigger and bigger, and the rain came, and the drought was ended, and the prophets and priests of Baal were made to look remarkably foolish. Now, is this what's happening with the Prime Minister today? Has he provided us Tories, with the cloud no bigger than a man's hand? And are the prophets of Baal, the socialists, about to be made to look remarkably foolish? Because for a while, up until fairly recently, with our high tax burden and costly green policies, it seemed as though Britain was destined to a tax and spend, low-growth economy with a socialist government in the offing. But a few weeks ago, a shift seemed to occur. It began with the Prime Minister's announcement to delay the ban on new petrol and diesel cars, on oil and gas boilers, indeed expanding production in the North Sea and removing costly greenhouse regulations. But there's more. About a week before the party conference, Jeremy Hunt announced plans to tackle the 5.4 million working-age out-of-work benefit recipients. And at the conference, the Chancellor announced a freeze on civil service jobs, which I'm delighted to say he's been criticised for by the Civil Service Union, the FDA, who said it was straight out of the Rees-Mogg playbook. Jolly good. And today, the Prime Minister has taken the bold decision, difficult decision, to scrap the northern leg of HS2. And this is the right decision because it's saving taxpayers money. It's not being wasteful and it's not going along with an old and tired consensus. And these are the steps on the path to election victory next year. The way to win the election and solving British woes It's what I said at the Monday's growth rally and on this programme later. It's cutting taxes, it's supply-side reforms, deregulation, boosting growth. And to cut taxes, we need to cut spending. We can't just run endless deficits. HS2 is expected to cost over £100 billion upon completion. Today's decision apparently saves £36 billion before you add on any further overruns, which they're bound to have been. We currently have nearly 100,000 more civil servants than we did in 2015-16. The blob has a proclivity to expand, and that comes with a cost. Freezing recruitment will save you, taxpayers, money, and an integral part of growing the economy is getting Britons back to work. And so the benefit reforms are crucial, and Rishi Sunak highlighted these in his speech, to getting our economy growing. But we've also got to make life better for consumers and put consumers first. Net zero reforms we need to have because they were just going to make life so costly for consumers. We know about electric cars being £20,000 at least, heat pumps £15,000. Pushing these back until the technology is better and the prices are lower will save you and me thousands of pounds. So it seems that the Prime Minister is looking to cut spending, paving the way for tax cuts, reforming net zero, which, along with reforming our benefit system, will allow the economy to grow. And actually, we haven't been doing too badly so far. Anyway, the revisions from the Office of National Statistics show that we outgrew France, Germany and Japan since the pandemic. And as the Prime Minister rightly said, this was because of Brexit. It's good news, and it'll be what wins the Conservatives the next election if it carries on and if we have more of it. But the debate tonight is this enough to convince Nigel Farage to join or possibly even rejoin the Tory party? Well, I'm delighted to say that the great man joins me now. Now, Nigel.
Jacob. Well, look, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, David Cameron, as leader of the Conservative Party, described me and UKIP when we were fruitcakes, loonies, closet racists, and Theresa May couldn't even bear to sort of hear the letters UKIP, let alone the surname Farage. So, actually, I thought the response that Rishi Sunak gave to Chris Hope did show a change of thinking. That's probably because Sunak realises that the overwhelming majority of people who paid good money to go to Manchester actually would agree with many of the things that I've campaigned on for all these long years. I also think, and I picked up at the conference, a fear of Richard Tyson reform, and it's Richard's conference this weekend, and I will go along and show support because they are going to put candidates up. I think, you know, he will announce this on Saturday. Right. So there's also a bit of that going on as well. I mean, look, I think you're right. I think what he did on the net zero policies a few weeks ago was a good thing. He hasn't got rid of any of this.
So you've got to go further on that.
Yeah, he's just kicked it into the long grass. And that's a slight improvement. I thought the HS2 decision was the right decision. I've always thought, why would you spend over £100 billion just to make London easier to get to? Because, frankly...
That was what it did.
Well,
yes.
And that's what the TGV did in France. It just made Paris bigger and stronger and more firms relocated there. And I'd love to think that £36 billion would get spent well and wisely and quickly in the other parts of the country, connecting up the northern towns and cities. So I agree with that. But there were two things about today. One, I think he's a very decent bloke, probably a very good accountant. But he's not an inspiring leader. You know, I don't sense that potential Tory voters have watched the news or the debates tonight and they're going, "Ugh, he's our man." And it's what he didn't talk about that I thought was extraordinary. No mention of legal migration. No mention of the fact that when we get the figures in a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be over 1 million people for the last 2 years who've legally, net, yes. Gross, it'll be nearer 2 million, have legally settled in the UK. And when it came to stop the boats, frankly, that was pathetic. I was looking for 4 letters for the last 2 days with Suella's speech, today with Rishi's, ECHR. If ever there was an issue that would genuinely complete the Brexit project, regain our judicial sovereignty, but interestingly, drive a massive wedge between the Tories and Labour at the next election, it was that. Didn't hear a word.
But at the moment, he can't do anything about the ECHR, can he? Because you wouldn't get it through the House of Commons, let alone through the House of Lords. And therefore, withdrawing from the convention and from the court needs to be a manifesto commitment for the next election.
Yes, but now was the moment to say so. Now, ahead of the Labour conference next week, now was the moment to say so. And he didn't do it. In fact, he did the opposite. He said, we will continue.
And we will accept our international
obligations. This was his chance to say today, we are deeply unhappy with ECHR. We're going to go and speak to the Poles and the Slovaks and the Italians and others, and we will try to get some wholesale change.
Well, they tried that. Ken Clarke tried that a few years ago, but not with great enthusiasm.
But getting back to your point of what's possible, he could say, that is what we're going to do. If we're unsuccessful, then wait for the next Conservative manifesto.
OK, but let's turn this round. Isn't it your duty to come back to the Tory party? Because I know you don't like it, but we are in a two-party system. At the next election, either the Conservatives win or the Labour Party will win. The Conservative Party does 75% of what you actually like.
No.
And there's 25%
Jacob,
that
I'm really sorry.
And you're absolutely adored by the Conservative members. They flocked around you like bees to a honeypot. It was quite remarkable.
It was extraordinary.
It was like Boris being at the party conference. And you don't quite have the hair, but otherwise it was like Boris being at the party conference. Don't you owe it to the Conservative Party to come and give us a little bit of oomph and lend some of your charisma to Conservatism?
I just can't give my support at this moment in time to an organisation that has put the tax burden up to the highest in 71 years, that has today extended the nanny state through this ludicrous idea that, you know, you're 26, you can't buy cigarettes, you're 27, you can, to a party that has... There was the hollowest line of that speech with a party of small business. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not. You've put up corporation tax by 30% this year. IR35 stays in place, making life incredibly difficult for sole traders.
IR35 is a menace and should have been abolished years ago.
And frankly, the differences between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party at the next election are going to be pretty narrow. They are both big state social democrat
But they're
parties.
not. Starmer wants to follow EU rules on everything. He's completely committed to all our international obligations and wants to make them more onerous.
I'm sorry, Rishi Sunak today confirmed that you're also doing that, and you and I both know we should have deregulated away from EU rules far more.
Well, I tried to.
There you are.
I was going to get rid of all 4,000.
So there you are. You're now agreeing with me, you see. But actually the differences are not that great.
No, what I'm saying is that you agree with 75% of Tory policies and that your patriotic duty is to help the Tory party because you want Britain to be better governed and it would be a disaster to let Sir Keir in. And therefore you need to,
I think,
come along, join the party, join people who like you. You know, you are popular with Conservatives.
I know that.
And help us get policy in the right direction.
I have a feeling, Jacob, that what has happened this week has given Richard Tice and Reform quite an opportunity. And I think... For the longer term, I think what needs to happen is, I think this Conservative Party, this iteration of the Conservative Party needs to lose, needs to go into opposition and rethink exactly what it is and what it's for. And I think there is a potential for a realigning of the centre-right of British politics. But it's not going to happen with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. And it's not going to happen, I'm afraid, with a Remainer-led cabinet. And it's not going to happen with a good accountant and nice bloke as leader. We did a different kind of politics. And I think, you know, one term of a Starmer government, they may be marginally worse than the Conservatives.
One of our best Prime Ministers in history was basically a good accountant in the form of Pitt the Younger. But that's an opportunity for another discussion. Basically, I think Nigel is a Tory of the highest kind, even if he's not formally a member of the Conservative Party. But we can discuss the difference on another occasion. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. After the break, we'll be looking into the question of HS2 with a pugnacious former editor of The Sun. Plus, is it time to ban smoking for the next generation altogether?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Neil says, well, welcome back. First, I've got to say, I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg. I was excited by the mailmogs that I was getting onto them without reminding that you were watching State of the Nation, but I'm sure you hadn't forgotten that. You're a wise lot. Neil says it doesn't matter what Sunak says because he's all talk and no action. To win back voters, he needs to take action. If he wanted to stop the boats, he would have done it by now. And Alan says the PM's speech did indicate that some common sense might be returning to the Tory party. However, I'll reserve judgment until I see some action, not just words. It was a decent speech, and it was, I think, definitely a decent speech. And I was knocking on a few doors later on today on the way back from Manchester, and it was really interesting, the people who were saying they didn't want to vote for Starmer, but they wanted to see the Conservative Party being properly Conservative. Also interesting how polite the electorate is. I met the most charming man who would never vote for me and loathed Brexit, but he was so polite about it that it does give you great confidence in British democracy. So, the big story of today was the much-anticipated, leaked even, scrapping of the northern leg of HS2, which the Prime Minister formally announced in Manchester, oddly in a repurposed railway station. And this is a triumph for those of us who've been calling for frugal spending and cutting waste. HS2 has been a disaster. When first introduced in the dying days of Gordon Brown's premiership, it was meant to cost a total of £20 billion. Now it's predicted to have a total cost of over £100 billion. Britain Remade estimated the stretch of HS2 from London to Birmingham will cost £396 million per mile, making it one of the most expensive railways anywhere in the world. In France, similar projects cost just £46 million per mile. The project's been branded unachievable by the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, but this saga points to a crisis in the cost of infrastructure in Britain. Why are we spending up to 10 times that of our European counterparts on railway infrastructure projects? Well, the problem seems to lie, among other things, with our labyrinthine planning system, which has never found an extra cost it didn't like. So the challenge for the Prime Minister is now ensuring that the £36 billion saved is spent sensibly rather than going into endlessly expensive planning complications rather than widening roads and removing bottlenecks in the railway. That's a bigger challenge than cancelling the project. It's stage 2 of the cut. Joining me now is the Director of Consumer Packaging Manufacturers Alliance, Mike Ridgway, live from Yorkshire. So, Mike, is this just a case of bad project management, really from the outset with HS2?
That's a bigger challenge than can.
Hello, Mike, can you hear me? I'm not sure. OK, well, Mike can't hear me, but fortunately I've got a brilliant panel who are going to discuss this with me, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker. Michael, didn't this project just start badly in terms of what they were trying to achieve and the costs associated with that, and since then it's got worse?
So, I mean, I think the idea that having high-speed rail between Britain's major cities is a bad idea is a little bit odd. I mean, France has it, Spain can do it. What is exceptional about Britain, which means we can't have high-speed rail?
Because we went for the very highest speed that meant the line had to be absolutely straight, which made the cost the highest it could possibly be, and that if you had a slightly lower speed, you can do it much more cheaply. So that's the big design flaw.
And then, but why were those design flaws there? And I think the problem with infrastructure in this country, and I think you've landed on something there, which is the planning system. I think the bigger problem was that the Conservatives were in government. This was going through the Chilterns and lots of nice places in the home counties, and so the costs massively ballooned because they had to put so much of it underground. Now, that's a shame on a couple of levels. One, it made it incredibly expensive. Two, if I'm getting the train from London to Birmingham, it's quite nice to see the countryside around you. What's the point in countryside if no one can see it? So we do have a problem whereby I think you've got too many NIMBY Tory backbenchers that made it incredibly expensive. You've also got a government which, because it's sort of lost so much capacity under, you know, I'm going to use the word neoliberalism, I'm sure you don't subscribe to that, but the idea being you sort of strip back the capacity of the civil service. They have to get in McKinsey, they have to get in KPMG to manage the whole thing. And then you've got those consultancies, those middle managers who aren't trying to keep costs down because that's not really in their interests. I think in France, in Spain, you've got some proper engineers in the civil service because they take state projects seriously.
Well, nobody apparently ever spoke to the man who ran HS1 about how to do it, which is just an extraordinary failure going back years. So, Kelvin, are we just incapable of building things cheaply and properly?
We're fine. Thank God for Rishi, who recognises that 36 billion is a hell of a lot of money, and with a bit of luck and the following wind, none of that will be spent in the north or anywhere. It will simply go into the... We are trillions in debt. We are a small country. We're not doing very well at the moment economically. We have no money. So I am delighted. I'm further delighted that actually David Cameron decides to come out. I don't know where he's been. He's obviously been in that kind of caravan he's got. You know, he's spent a lot of time in there. He's finally said something. Now, this is a guy who scarpered. Immediately he found out that people didn't feel like he did about Europe, right? So his touchstones are almost non-existent. He was, to my mind, the worst of the Conservatives, a neoliberal Conservative, a shocking, shocking person. But he now says that we now can't produce this, we can't produce that. Actually, at the moment, I don't think we should even be thinking about producing anything. We have no money. And until we have money, we shouldn't be doing anything. Nobody is running their household on the same basis as either a Conservative government or, God help us, a socialist government.
I mean, I've always rather liked David Cameron, but leaving that to one side, Michael, my main objection to HS2 was that all the economic evidence is that money is better spent on roads, not rail, in terms of economic consequence. And that if you're spending tens of billions of pounds, you should spend it on the thing where 87% of journeys are taken. That's on the roads. And we spent it in this glorious 19th century romanticism of railways. We've watched far too much Agatha Christie on the Orient Express.
We haven't built any railways.
Michael Portillo.
That's right. And it's so bad economically.
Well, we haven't built any railways since the 19th century, so it seems a little bit strange to sort of talk about 19th century romanticism. The problem is we haven't replaced those railway lines.
Crossrail. I mean,
Crossrail, yeah, but all that's underground. I mean, Crossrail was great. That was something that everyone complained about at the time. Now it's in place, always busy. Everyone loves it. I think the idea that constantly we start these projects and then cancel them instead of saying, look, sometimes you've got to spend a bit of money and you will reap the benefits in the future.
Honestly, man, I disagree with you. We don't start a lot of projects and cancel them. We are cancelling this one specifically because it is massively expensive and we haven't got the wherewithal to pay for it. So now we've come up with another way of doing it, which will take a very long time, and as people point out, Rishi nor any Conservative Prime Minister will be around to see it through.
I think that's a very good point, though, right? Because Rishi Sunak was standing in front of the country today saying he's going to make long-term decisions for a brighter future. And then he said, well, this is going to take 20 years, so we might as well not bother. Right? Well, if you're making long-term decisions for a brighter future... But
he's come up with a whole...
Because something takes 20 years doesn't mean you shouldn't...
But he's come up with a whole range of things that will take effect within 20 years.
They come up on the back of a fact packet.
And you've been in the cabinet, you are a senior politician. What is it about ordinary people who, when given the chequebook, OPMs, other people's money, feel that they have to spend it? Did you feel a pressure to sign off on stuff?
No, I never supported HS2. The thing I found difficult was when I was bound by collective responsibility, having to pretend that I thought it was a good idea, which I don't think I ever did very convincingly.
We're talking about ask you this: Did you see colleagues around you, not necessarily Conservative colleagues, but Socialist colleagues, who felt that they had to leave an imprint, a legacy, and therefore they would sign?
I think very often people wanted to spend money as a sign of their success as a minister. I didn't. I always want to not spend your money. Anyway, I'm delighted to say that joining me now is the Director of Consumer Packaging Manufacturers Alliance, Mike Ridgway, live from Yorkshire. Mike, thank you very much for bearing with us and getting the gremlins out of the technology. Do you think this is just bad project management, or was it always a flawed scheme?
Sir Jacob, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity of talking to you. There's a combination of problems. Undoubtedly, there was bad management involved, and the cost overruns quite amazing. I would draw your attention, and you'll be very interested in this, when Brunel built the Great Western Railway, that was overshot by 3 to 4 times. And it was because of engineering problems, building the Maidenhead Bridge, Sonning Cutting and Box Tunnel, which you'll all know very well. Now, cost is important, but what we're not looking in this debate is what the generation is going to be from the railway. Now, it's estimated that at Euston, the development on that area for business will generate something in the order of £50 billion for an £8 billion investment. You go up to Manchester, and we're talking about £100 billion investment. And it's the growth from the railway that's going to be beneficial. And I would draw your attention also, Sir Jacob, to our other infrastructure projects in this country over the years. When we built the M25, there was a lot of fuss about, do we want to build this motorway around London? Is it going to be used? You know what it's like now, it's just a car park a lot of the times. And of course, there's the Channel Tunnel. The Channel Tunnel was designed, and people would say, can't build it, too expensive, people will be frightened to go in there, and all that sort of thing. And where will we be?
But Mike, these are really, really good points. And what you say about the Great Western Railway and about the Channel Tunnel has one key difference, and that both of those were done on private money. And if there's this 50 billion return around Euston, 100 billion return around Manchester, then it would be perfectly reasonable to offer this up to the private sector, not to put it on the backs of the taxpayer.
But if the business case is there, the taxpayer would get a benefit from it. I know what you mean about investing in government money, investing in commercial projects. Not a particularly good record, but this railway line, HS2, would last for 100 years. It's not going to fold up in a decade's time. So there is a lot of long-term benefit coming from this.
But I think the rigour of private sector investment, and indeed the risk of losing money, which obviously some of the early investors in the Channel Tunnel did, actually leads to better cost control and better management of projects. And that because taxpayers seem to have unlimited cash, government-run projects are always more difficult and more likely to overrun.
One thing that did come out of the discussion this afternoon from the Prime Minister was the fact that he's taking the management of the Euston end of the railway out of the HS2's management's hands. Now, I thought that was quite encouraging, because there should be a better discipline there on the investment and the capex requirements for that sort of investment. Now, it's a great pity that that process hasn't been used in other parts of the line, but we are where we are. We spend an awful lot of money on this, and I just think it's a terrible mistake to cut it short now, and it should be allowed to go into Manchester and get the benefits over the longer term.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. We haven't got into the conversation I normally have with guests from Yorkshire about the benefits between Yorkshire and Somerset, but Somerset wins. Thank you so much. After a few messages from our sponsors, no more A-levels and no more rip-off degrees. It's education, education, education. Plus, should the NHS pay reparations for slavery?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Pat says, at last money is being diverted away from the richest cities in England with the cancellation of HS2 and shared across the country where infrastructure and investment is at its lowest. Peter, why does it take years and cost billions to confirm what the everyday people have been saying from the start of HS2? I agree with you entirely, Peter. Chris, Jacob, we need Nigel to be Prime Minister. And the only party he can achieve this is by rejoining the Conservative Party. Have a quiet word. Well, I was having a very public word with him, encouraging him to rejoin. I'm supporting the Prime Minister we've got, rather than speculating about others, though some people at Manchester were quite keen to show off their virtues in case there were ever a vacancy. So, education, education, education is another topic of the day after the Prime Minister announced his pledges for Britain's future students. Rishi Sunak today announced the shake-up of our secondary education system. A single qualification, the Advanced British Standard. This qualification will bring together A-levels and their apprenticeship sibling, T-levels. Students will study 5 subjects rather than the current 3, including some form of mathematics, and I'm not sure all my children are delighted about this, Mary, and English up until the age of 18. He claimed this was bring us up the ranks against our competitors, not only with the number of subjects taken, but with the number of hours spent in classrooms and with teachers. Our education system has been broken for too long. It ought to reflect the needs of our economy and not the interests of universities that received huge sums of money for providing second-tier degrees in which the lessons are done remotely or indeed the teachers are on strike. What we need is tradesmen, not gender studies graduates. Well, I'm now joined by former A-level and GCSE examiner Anis Garfield and teacher and founder of the ACES Charitable Trust, Steve Chalk. Thank you both very much for joining me. Anis, do you think this is a long overdue reform that will really help people and will help the economy?
Long overdue. We shouldn't be wallowing in an out-of-date education system. Our children, our pupils, need to meet the modern world, cope with the modern world. Some of them do want to go to universities. I see that there's a good swipe at universities, which is a good thing, but some people don't care. Some children, pupils, don't care about economic success. They want to take interest in humanities. And they should be allowed to go to university. But on the other hand, a lot of children want employability. They want jobs ready for them to go into a job, and they should be catered for in our schools.
Because Rishi was pretty critical of the 50% target, wasn't he, that Labour set. Do you think this is a target that it's worth getting rid of formally?
Absolutely, and I was very surprised at you quoting our Labour Minister, Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who said education, 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 without defining it, saying 50% should go to universities without defining what they should do at these, what are known as Mickey Mouse universities and what Rishi Sunak refers to as rip-off degrees.
And Steve, do you agree with that? Do you think that getting rid of that target is sensible, or it's not just about education, it's also about the type of society that we ought to want to achieve?
I think it's about all of those things, Jacob. And I think that what Rishi Sunak said today about A-levels, T-levels, combining them, I think that's a wonderful aspiration. My concern about it all is, of course, that this will not kick in for anyone except those who just entered primary school at the very beginning of reception classes this year, 2036, it makes any difference. So the question is, what happens now? And I've got some other questions as well. When the Prime Minister talked about government failing for the last 30 years and he was going to turn that around, I think for all educationists, they wouldn't recognise that figure at all, 30 years. They talk about the last 13 years of education being squeezed. And the Prime Minister didn't talk about the priorities that I hear our staff and other staff in other schools. We run 54 schools around the country. But as I talk to educationists, their priorities are different. Whereas they think it's fantastic that we do something decent with 16 to 18 education, 16 post-16 education. Their priorities, as I'm sure you know, are absenteeism, mental health, the fact that what Sir Kevin Collins said we needed, 15 billion to sort out the mental health issue, never came. Their issues are about the retention of teachers because of the very poor resources in the classroom. Their issues are about an education all the way through that's wide enough to hold every child there. What about neurodiversity, etc.?
But Steve, this will widen education. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the other bits. But this will widen education by making people do 5 subjects rather than 3. There'll be an up to £30,000 tax-free bonus for teachers teaching core subjects. So there will be money for teachers. Isn't that very welcome and positive from your point of view?
of course, all that's welcome if it comes about, but it's a long-term time in the future. I think what educationists were concerned about, and I think would be flabbergasted that the Prime Minister didn't talk about 14 to 16 education as well, because as you all know, better than I do, even those who introduced, Ken Baker, Conservative Secretary of State for Education, who introduced GCSEs and assessment at 14, says that that's not fit for the modern world. So for me, none of this really went far enough. And the bit that does go far enough, I agree about the A-levels and T-levels, is almost like a pipe dream. It's so far in the future. Those are my questions about it. I don't know how you see it.
Anis, are you concerned about this, that it's all too far off before anything actually happens? And also, there's dismissing of everything that's happened in the last 30 years. I personally think the Gove reforms from 2010 were really very important and very successful, and the work done by Nick Gibb on reading has been transformational.
It's very difficult. You've got to have ambition. You've got to plan for the future, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I'm sure Mr. Chalk has a very good idea. He's got very good colleagues. He's a teacher himself. And if we had more teachers like him, and how do we attract them? And let children study what they want to, instead of being compressed into narrow set book subjects at A-level. Our A-levels are restricting this baccalaureate type system, and I don't know why it wasn't introduced when it was first mooted. My father was on the committee that recommended it, but then we went to GCSEs. Now, Mr. Chalk, do you think GCSEs and ASs were a good idea?
Well, I'm afraid we've got to draw the conversation to a conclusion there. But thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry. We've got to move on. But thank you very much to Anis and Steve. And I think we all know, everyone knows, that there are teachers who turn out to be absolutely inspirational to the people they teach. I saw that in my own education, and I see it with my children. Coming up, while the NHS should be busy treating patients, it's been pontificating about much more important matters: reparations for slavery.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still identifying as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you know this still identifies as State of the Nation. Well, all ears were listening closely for the Prime Minister's announcement on HS2 earlier, but he also took the opportunity to announce reforms to our smoking laws. The official proposal is to increase the legal smoking age by 1 year every year. Followed to its logical conclusion in 2083, a 74-year-old gentleman will have to ask his elder friends to buy him cigarettes and will be ID'd all the time to make sure we're not sneaking a packet of Marlboro Lights when we're not quite old enough. This policy comes from the Khan Review last year, inspired by the somewhat sinisterly named smoke-free agenda, which doesn't mean free cigarettes or free to smoke wherever you like. It means getting rid of smoking, which is a worthy aim, because smoking kills. And as Sunak said, nobody wants their children to smoke. And if my children are listening, no, I don't want you to smoke, even though I'm all in favour of liberty. But when the law eventually phases out almost all smokers, there will come a time when there's one person left in the UK who's legally allowed to smoke, and when that person dies, what happens to the billions of revenue that the taxpayer clause in, or the Treasury clause in, that pays for many of our public services? With me now is Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA. No, thank you for coming on, Christopher. The one thing that Rishi said that resonated with me was this point that no parent wants his or her children to smoke. I certainly don't want my children to smoke. This is marvellous. I mean, it means 2 of my children will legally be allowed to buy cigarettes and the other 4 won't be. In a way, shouldn't I be saying that Rishi should be tougher and bring it in for 16-year-olds now?
Well, it depends. I mean, I would rather have my child grow up in a free country, to be perfectly honest with you. And, you know, when she's an adult, she's going to be an adult, and it's not for me to tell her what to do anymore, and it's certainly not for the government to tell her what to do. So I think we have here a fairly preposterous and illiberal policy. There's no point making the libertarian case about this particularly. You know, some people feel that adults shouldn't have the right to smoke tobacco, and other people feel differently. But the way this is being done, in particular, strikes me as absurd. I'm very surprised that somebody who seems reasonably sensible and intelligent like Rishi Sunak would go along with this idea that's been imported from New Zealand, where it hasn't even been introduced yet there by Jacinda Ardern before she drifted off into the sunset. It's going to lead, like you say, to some pretty absurd outcomes. One of the obvious consequences will be that people who are old enough to buy cigarettes will sell them to people who aren't. And equally, obviously, the black market, which already, according to government figures, makes up 18% of tobacco sales, will blossom even further.
Well, Christopher, that's the thing I worry about most on this proposal, is that if you make a once legal product illegal, as we found with prohibition, that really ends up being a blank cheque to organised crime, because they then take over the market, and in 20 years or so, 30 years, it would be black market cigarettes, that would be organised crime, and it's very difficult to make a once legal product illegal.
Yeah, South Africa banned tobacco during COVID. During the lockdowns, the government took the excuse to use it as an excuse to ban tobacco. And unsurprisingly, you saw this massive black market. There's obviously a huge black market with prohibition of alcohol in the 1920s. The war on drugs has not been won. Essentially, what Rishi Sunak really is saying here is he wants to open up a new front in the war on drugs. And for what? To stop adults smoking cigarettes? Nobody wants children to smoke cigarettes. We have lots of laws to try and prevent that, and very few children actually do. There's only about 1% of 11 to 15-year-olds smoke anything like regularly. But it's absurd to have people, yeah, a two-tier society really is what we're saying. We're saying it's okay for adults to smoke so long as they've already started smoking, but this group of people can never do it.
OK, well, thank you very much, Christopher. I do recall a leading article in the Times that said England free rather than England sober may be a noble motto, but England free rather than England cancer-free may be a different one. Moving on to the NHS's yearly budget, it's about £180 billion. Services stretched, its waiting lists are high, doctors still go on strike. But in spite of all of this, a hospital in Scotland has decided that what it's most concerned about is reparations for slavery. The crisis-hit NHS Lothian has decided to publish a report establishing how the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh may have profited from the slave trade, amounting to a sum of roughly £40 million in today's money. As a result, it's proposed a number of restorative measures, including a rather patronising apology to people of African descent, as well as commissioning artworks which are bound to be ghastly to victims of slavery. As this pathetic gesture really points to a broader problem. You cannot undo the past. These gestures do not benefit those who suffered, but the cost falls on taxpayers alive today. Well, my brilliant panel's still with me. Michael, this is perhaps a very unfair question for you, but if you've got a hospital and you are waiting for a hip operation, don't you want the money spent on that rather than on some fantastical reparation for something that happened a couple of hundred years ago?
I mean, this, to me, every now and again we get asked to talk about stories that I think are just completely ridiculous, and this is one of them. We're speaking to someone who has been in government, right, for a few years of the past 13 years. There are 7 million people waiting on waiting lists, the highest it's ever been. Don't just blame COVID, because it had doubled already before the pandemic hit.
I'm blaming strikes, actually, but...
Now all of a sudden, well, it doubled before anyone was striking. It was double before anyone had COVID-19. Now, it seems to me you're trying to deflect blame to one single hospital where it seems like probably a member of staff wanted to rectify some issues that the hospital had with the slave trade. I think there was an investor or one of the surgeons sort of bequeathed to the hospital a slaving plantation or whatever. Now, clearly this shouldn't be the priority of the people managing the NHS, but it's not the priority of anyone managing that hospital. This is just a nice gesture which a hospital has made. They're not paying any money to anyone, by the way. They're just commissioning a painting. And we do have a crisis in the NHS. It has absolutely nothing to do with people commissioning paintings.
Isn't this the sort of stuff that needs to be exposed by a free press and a free media, because it's what focuses the mind of bureaucrats not to do really daft things?
Yes, well, look, I feel sorry. The cancer scares in Scotland are shocking, and the cancer figures are the worst. I mean, it's a shocking organisation. NHS.
Well, that's partly to do with sort of the history of alcohol abuse in Scotland, isn't it? More than...
Well, I don't know what the reason is, but it is bloody awful. So you wouldn't want to be ill in Scotland, that's for sure. But isn't it really the case? And there's a tremendous political divide coming up on this. If reparation can be, I'm taking it that they'll all be socialists there. I mean, you know, take it as read, because there are no Conservatives in Scotland, as you know, right? The reparation becomes an issue that Labour embraces, and the Conservative side of the country, not necessarily Conservatives, but the Conservatives, they say this is ridiculous that 273 years later we're talking about handing money or making art or doing anything for them. I think there's a tremendous amount of political capital to be made out of it. This is a ridiculous story, a ridiculous hospital concentrating on something rather than worrying about patients.
Well, I think the Telegraph and I think Jacob is probably trying to make political capital out of this.
I think the point is
people care more about how long they have to wait for their hip operation.
Thank you very much. I want reparations for the dissolution of the monasteries. That's my priority. Money to Holy Mother Church. Thank you. That's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what have you got on your bill of fare this evening?
Absolutely fantastic show, Jacob. I'm going to be talking about whether or not the language that Suella Braverman used in her speech was OK. Is it too offensive? I obviously think not, but some people certainly do. Nigel Farage, the return of him to the Conservative Party. Could that ever happen? Will he ever be Prime Minister one day? Are the Conservative Party now the only party really standing up for women? And is King Charles right to cave into Andrew and let him live out his days in luxury?
Well, that sounds extremely interesting, and language is so important. The wind of change that is turning into a hurricane or a typhoon if you're in the Far East. That's all coming up after the weather, where I hope there won't be either typhoons or hurricanes. A typhoon in England would be most unusual. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been Save the Nation, and I'm sure you're waiting with bated breath to find out that the weather in Somerset tomorrow will be perfect.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. A little bit of a mixed picture as we end off the day. We've got rain lingering across parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. Will just sink its way southwards into parts of Northern England as well, before generally petering off into the second half of the night. Though some other areas of rain just beginning to push their way into parts of Northern Ireland throughout the early hours as well. A good amount of cloud around will hold up the temperatures for most places around 11-13 degrees Celsius, but parts of northern Scotland will drop off a touch more, down into those single figure values under the clearer skies we have here. This rain will then spread its way in as we head throughout Thursday. Quite a damp start to the day for Northern Ireland, then into Western Scotland, Western England and Wales also seeing a fair amount of rain throughout the day. Past southeastern areas of England, though, staying largely dry with some sunny spells here, so a relatively fine day across the board. Will be quite breezy for most of us, taking the edge off some of those temperatures a touch, but 19 degrees Celsius possible in the south, generally more around the 16 to 17 degrees Celsius further north. Into Friday, this mixture of low pressure and high pressure continues. Generally high pressure stuck towards the south, helping to keep things relatively fine and dry, but this trailing frontal system across northern areas will continue to bring outbreaks of rain at times, could turn quite persistent really into areas of Scotland, particularly once this next pulse moves in later on in the day. But further towards the south, again, a good amount of sunshine as we head into the afternoon and into the weekend as well.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know